Hola people. So today I wanted to come to you on this partial solar eclipse and talk about something that I actually apply in my own personal practice. And this is key in something where I not only navigate my path through life, but it has something that I continue to fine tune and assist me in my journey. And in particular, this is an intuitive visualization. Now, before I begin, I'd like to touch on intuition. I would personally define it as a mix of being able to find an inherent knowing that's aligned to who you are as well as what already is. Now, the complexity of it is taken into consideration not only the clarity of what you perceive and what you feel, but as well as how it aligns with the world existing without you. So, one thing to take in mind is that there are a lot of distractions on the way. And if someone's really early on in their tuning of intuition, that it does take time, it does take a requirement to invest your own effort into tuning your senses. It As you develop it, it will become easier and easier, but at the same time too, it's not going to occur overnight. Now, this is something I've practiced for a while now that I've reached this point where it's easily accessible. So intuition itself can have some road blockages in terms of something as simple as the natural gyroscope of the body or the egoic perspective of what they desire, as well as various components that include your environment and your ability to get clear. Now, one thing that I do suggest as a prerequisite is the ability just to meditate. And by meditate, I mean to clear thought, to be in the present now. And meditation is seen as something as you just sit there and be quiet. But in reality, you're trying to get in tune to the present flow of reality. And there's always an ever present, thus the requirement to just sit there and take it in. As you become present, you are no longer putting effort into the energetics of thoughts or attention, allowing for an input to come in from a greater, higher source of power, whether it's your higher self or it's the universe in general, however you'd like to have your philosophy consider where the information is coming from, be it from the Akashic records or be it from wherever else you feel it deemed is a refutable source that allows you to feel that it aligns with your truth and it has a feeling of truth that is beyond your own understanding. Now, you can recognize what is being given to you without having to fully understand it. Now, to take that as it is requires an act of faith to allow that trust to take place. Now, with intuition, it is very common for people to think they're being intuitive when in reality they are actually just trying to support their own subconscious desires. To break this mold, it takes the ability to just be clear with oneself, to step outside of them in a third person perspective that allows them to be conscious and aware of who they are along their journey, so that you do not introduce a lot of muddying along the intuition path. So as we are clearing up with what intuition essentially would be and is, we are now moving forward with what I like to give a visualization that allows you to not only fine tune it, but to work with the intuition. Now, personally, intuition acts as a knowing. If you allow yourself to just look at something and try to pull from it, you very well could act upon it. But in most cases, if you're trying to find out something, it requires a question so that an answer can be provided from higher self, universe, source, wherever you'd like to associate where the information comes from. As it comes to you, it could be something you might not even know. But in this case, what I'd like to go about is a visualization that I personally practice, which is allowing a meter. Now, due to the left and right side, we have two polarities. And if you were to allow a meter to take place, you can have one side to be a polarity of yes and one side to be a polarity of no. Now, one way I would go about creating a polarity is to see where it magnetically aligns. Now, I relate this to a compass, how it just is light enough to move, but not enough to be held back, so that the magnetics pull it. Now, when you visualize, you have to have the same delicate touch. So if I was to ask a question, for example, would it be wise to blah blah blah? And I would ask it in a yes or no format. So I would first visualize it here, and then see where it's first drawn to. Most cases you can get an image of where it's leaning to, thinking it's more here, or it's definitely a no or yes, however you'd like to perceive it. You get to choose and dictate the sides. So as it goes back and forth, you can allow it to be something where you're unsure. You can see where it fits right. So it's like blindly seeing what fits into the right shape. So in this case, you're like, okay, where does it fit best and where does it resonate best? Allowing that to take place allows for a nice little spectrum to be had, so that when you're in a case of going off intuition but still coming from an ego perspective, you can see what fits right. Now, there are some things that come in the way that I've learned over the period of time. One easy one is the gyroscopic perspective your body likes to take into consideration. For example, if you're leaning on one side, you're more than likely during the visualization to lean in that direction. That is one of the first disconnects that has to be done for it to be an unbiased visualization. The second that would come into place would be how you allow your ego to step out so that you can perceive what it is as it is. Now, this is something that's a little more complex because it's more of something you have to experience for yourself to know, rather than somebody like myself telling somebody. So in this case, you want to be able to connect with it in a way where it comes to you without any influence from your own being. So it just either appears as the image. For example, if you were to use this visualization, you would allow it to either, it just flashes in your mind in merely not even a second, and you get a sense of where it fits. Now, that would be the quickest and most reliable way of being able to connect and read your intuition. When it comes to the spectrum approach, one would have to treat it more like a compass, like a magnetic needle being drawn to be towards somewhere, and then where it sits is where it likes to be interpreted from. And a lot of these things, when you have a polarity, you do have a spectrum in between. It's not just always a solid yes, it's not just always a solid no in some cases. In my interpretation, if you have it definitely on one end or the other, you're going to get a pretty much solid yes. But in the in-betweens, if you're reading something and it comes to you and it's like in the middle, that is it's unobtainable. It's not able to be decided as of yet. So those are questions that are more harder to answer due to the fact that it is indifferent, or it's something that cannot be given based off what you ask. Now, if it's leaning on just a little bit, you can see that there's a sway, so one can see that it's getting to be a yes, but it's coming from a transition. For example, if I was to see like a time frame of, let's say, if I was going to be back by this, this, and this, I would see what would come forth. But if I ask the first one and it's a no over here, and I go for an hour later if I was trying to figure a time frame, and it's over here, you can tell in that time span that there's a nice transition coming from here to here. Now that allows it to get more in tune, so that by the time you get over here, you do see that it's a solid yes. Now there's a flexibility in there. Because it's a percentage, you gotta measure it in terms of like 30-70. So as it leans over, you understand that there's a heavy leaning towards what is being provided on this side of the spectrum. But at the same time too, because there is a spectrum, it is not always going to be accurate to tell you that it's a solid yes no matter what. It leaves room for adaptability, influence, and change that is outside of your inherent control. These sorts of concepts are more in tune to allowing to accept the world as it is, but also being open for the things that are outside one's control so that they can introduce other factors. Now, these are things that are beyond the knowledge of knowing, but at the same time, too, depending on where you're tapping into and being in tune and aligned with yourself, you could very well bring in information that is going beyond what these are already taken into consideration. Now, that's why one can connect to the higher self, or one can connect to that of the universe, or God, however that word likes to be interpreted, of all that is. Now, as that comes into play, you're able to then be clear with yourself on whether or not you'd like to take that information as it is. If you have an egoic perspective on it, which is just the thought process of being aware of yourself, not just the I am that observes, you are allowing for a moment of either hesitation or confusion to be introduced so that you can either see whether or not you have a personal desire that is stepping in the way for the outcome you wish, or it could be that you are allowing for an uncertainty to not agree with what is being provided to you. Now, these sorts of factors have to be decided for themselves. Another big part that hasn't been mentioned up till yet is the way questions are formatted. If someone says, I'm going to win the lottery tomorrow, there is a set of intention that is put there, but being convinced you are can also have an influence on that. Now, allowing that question would not give an accurate response, but the idea of will it be likely to win the lottery tomorrow can give you a percentage. Most likely, it's going to end up in the no. Now, if you're going to try to use these sort of intuitive questionnaires to find a self-gain, your alignment towards your motivation to allow this to happen very well could muddy it before you even ask the question. So it's important to consider the way you ask a question. It's not like, can I? It's, will I? Or is it possible? Or the potential to be. These sorts of vocabulary are important so that you do align it not only in a question format, but it provides a sense of potential rather than a restrictive perspective on what it is you're actually asking about. And sometimes being able to ask, can you do something, most likely will result in a yes, so that it comes to the possibility that you are being answered for the question you asked, whether or not you can do something. But if it comes about to you getting clear on the terms of a possibility or a potential being the case, this is where it's very important to allow for yourself to ask a question that is not just proper, but is in tune to act in natural law, so that you know that it's not a restriction, it's not something where you corner the question, but you very well could say, alright, I have this question, I'll find it out. From this, I'll be able to understand this perspective, and then if another question follows or thereafter, you can continue to refine it through multiple questions. Now, that will give you a sense of whether or not the intuition itself can be backed up, or if the intuition itself is allowing for some sort of interference in terms of your own personal path or the environment that you happen to be in. Now, this very much is a consciousness-based perspective, so it requires you to not only be clear through that meditative state, but to be able to just quiet the mind and allow and listen. Listening is key, because listening, even with the sight of the third eye, allows you to perceive in a fashion that is not just looking with your current eyesight. You can see things for as they are, but as they come to you is a mix of feelings, visualization, and the concept of interpretation. In a way that is similar to dreams, the way that we interpret something is very fine-tuned to who we are as a being, whether it's coming from the subconscious or it's something that is beyond us in a way that is formatted for us to understand and interpret. That's why each of us has our own path to walk, and the way that we have our own dreams also provide us with our own perspective and sense of view associated with who we are or who we decide to define ourselves as. Now, these things are another thing that come into play and should be considered in every purpose of the intuition. From where we go from here is something to consider, that if one was to practice the intuition, it comes from not only a heart-based perspective, but it provides a visualization that allows you a vision that is not just coming to you, but sits as is. And it allows you a range of adjustment so that not only do you sit there and take it in, but you're able to work with it and understand better to be why you're asking what you're asking and the means for the outcome you wish to bring out of it. Whether it's a way of understanding that you're at a fork in the road and you want to know whether to go left or right and which one will take you to your destination, it's a matter of understanding that your destination can be reached by both paths. But which one will get you there quicker is why one would ask which path would be ideal to take if trying to get to so and so by blah blah blah. Now, as you introduce your questions, by blah 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 would be an example of if you're trying to set a restriction, sometimes that will result in a no due to the fact that you've introduced a restriction. So trying to have it open-ended is very much allowing for a universal potential to take form based outside of restrictions in which you place on the outcome. Now, this can get complex in terms of a philosophical standpoint, but it's has a unique simplicity to it because it allows you to not only get true with what is, but to clearly define where you're actually becoming more hands-on with trying to shape what you're trying to find out, or you're allowing it to show up as it is. Now, as you're able to tune in and practice more and more, it becomes easier, and you can have it show up as it is. And as long as you're attuned and aligned with who you are and coming from the heart, and you're in a state of being that is receptive, this is becoming more easier and refined for you to get a clear answer in terms of being able to navigate the path you walk. I personally use this from various aspects of understanding of what could be done in a day, or which direction to take, or how to go about certain situations. In some cases, I understand my preference of it, but being able to honor what's provided to you is being able to recognize the knowing that exists outside of who you are and what you decide to conceive, both in the mental state, the feeling state, and who you decide to actually combine these two into agreeing with. Now, sometimes there is a gut feeling to it, which also can provide an intuitive perspective on what can be the outcome, but it's not always going to provide you the most accurate if you are dealing with various emotions or sorts of feelings that could get in a way and muddy it. Now, so this won't take too long. I'd like to go over again that initially to get clear, to allow it to become into an empty space inside your head, inside your mental perception, and then allow the question to take form. Once you allow the question to take form, you listen, which once it is asked should come to you fairly quickly. It should just appear like that. It's an instant knowing. Whether or not you're able to tap into it is more attuned to who you are as a person and where you are on your spiritual journey. So as I would tap into it, I would ask the question, and depending on where it would fall on the meter I visualize allows me to get a sense on whether or not it's more of a solid yes, it's a flexible yes, it's undecided, it can't be decided, it's leaning towards a no, and the more no you go, the more polarity you can go between the two, the more you can have a sense. Now, when you create a polarity, you don't have to do just a yes or no. You can create an option between two. For example, if it's between one or the other and you can't choose, you can create the same kind of visual polarity to see where you magnetically align. Now, this magnetic attraction is going to be key in terms of shaping what comes to you. So it's not just a question, it's what you create. So your visualization is also a part of what you allow to take form. Since you create the question and you create the visualization, you then allow for an answer to take form using what you've created. that is important because it's creating a reality for your answer to existent. It's allowing that sphere, that field, to take place so that existence can form within it. And that is where your answer lies. So without further ado, this is something that I would recommend practicing, getting a sense of, and as you develop it, you not only get clear with yourself, but you can actually start to recognize if you're starting to muddy it, or if it's something that seems to get in the way or becomes more complex for you, or if there's other factors at play which get in the way. At times, you won't always be able to utilize this visualization depending on how clear you are, but when it is capable of taking place, this is something that has helped me greatly and wanted to share for others if they wanted to apply it in their own life in their own way. Now, everyone's different, so the idea of visualization comes down to the ability to create, and create has to do with who you are as a creator being. Someone like myself who is an artist who has to visualize things, or for example, for my unique being, I'm more visual than conceptual in terms of utilizing my imagery versus utilizing the idea of a string of words. Now, for me to be more attuned to imagery, I use a visualization versus something like how a psychic would utilize and receive messages. Now, those messages very well work in that same manner, but it is tuned to who that unique person is and their strengths and weaknesses. So for them, they're much more easily able to conjure up that idea, that concept of reality, so that the answer can come in, so that they can be receptive based on what they're most comfortable with. So with this, I recommend my path in terms of someone who is more visual and imagery-like, but at the same time, too, to understand who you are, as it is key to seeing what is best for you. You can adapt to other practices, but at the same time, too, without acknowledging who you are as you are not able to work with that. And working with that is a very important part of being able to get in tune with not only yourself, but the universe around you. So with that, I wish the best of you to practice your intuition and to continue tuning your senses to the best at which you can. And that it does take time, but it's a rewarding, I'm not sure if it's like a feedback, but it's certainly a rewarding skill, sense that allows you to navigate without having to have your world dictate and influence your path. It's something that comes from your connection to whether it's spiritual, to your higher self, or to the universal being of all that is. All of this is in part to the faith you are able to place inside this concept. With all that said, I continue to wish the best of you, and until the next video, so long and stay true, people.